Welcome to World Question Serbia. Right now, this Balkan nation is being rocked by student-led demonstrations and roadblocks. Protesters are calling for snap elections, accusing the government of corruption and democratic backsliding. President Vučić has in turn accused the protesters of being part of a foreign plot trying to destabilize his country. So, what next for Serbia? This landlocked nation in southeast Europe, formerly part of Yugoslavia, stands at a political crossroads. First, there are the student-led protests over corruption and what demonstrators claim is a lack of democracy. Then there's the future direction of the country. Serbia wants to join the EU, but continues to share strong ties with Russia. Which way should the country turn? With me to debate some of the many questions we've received from around Serbia are Marko Đurić, the Minister of Foreign Affairs for the governing Serbian Progressive Party. Thank you for joining us, Minister.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me on the program.
Borko Stefanović is Deputy President of the opposition Freedom and Justice Party. Welcome, Borko.
Thank you for having me.
Danica Ilić is a journalist, formerly of the BBC and B92 Radio. Thanks to you too, Danica.
It's good to be here again.
And Filip Balunović is a research fellow at the University of Belgrade. Welcome to you too, Filip. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Welcome to you, Filip, and to all our panellists. Now, let's go straight to our first questioner. He's a student and has been involved in the protests, and perhaps reflecting the current tense climate, he would rather not be identified. What's your question?
Hello, everyone. Greetings from Serbia. Can the Serbian public overthrow this government when our media space is monopolized, the elections repeatedly falsified, and the Western political elites seem to keep relying on President Vučić as a partner?
OK, well, that wave of protest sweeping the country, no let up. 300,000 people gathered in Belgrade not long ago, earlier this year, probably the biggest demonstration Serbia's ever seen. Borko Stefanović, will the protesters topple the government?
Well, I think that we're getting there. And I think that which is really crucial and important, two things. One is that we create a unified front in Serbia between all the social actors, actually, not only opposition and the students and also activists, NGOs, and all sorts of various spheres of our life in order to keep it peaceful, to keep it, ardent, and to try to do it in a way which is the only possible way, which is through the elections. Now, of course, our regime and Mr. Vučić, they are not willing to give elections, and they will try to postpone any calling for snap elections in our country. And we have to bear in mind that elections, as we call it in Serbia, are not really elections like you have in UK, for example, because our elections are proven and documented rigged elections. It was confirmed by European Parliament's resolution. It was confirmed by OSCE findings. It was confirmed even by the European Commission report. Pretty much it's now clear after 8 months of protests in Serbia, which are massive, and now they are in the streets of every Serbian city and town. So we believe that the only way forward is to have at least democratic and free elections in our country, which means that we need to have at least a register of the voters open for scrutiny.
Filip Balunović is a research fellow at the University of Belgrade. Many professors like you support the protests. What do you want?
I think this is a crucial point in the post-socialist recent history of Serbia, because something has been wrong, not only during the time of the governance of Serbian Progressive Party and Mr. Vučić, but something has been wrong ever since the dissolution of Yugoslavia that you mentioned in your introduction. So this is a call not only for institutions to function, but also for institutions to function in a way that will create more just society. In my view, my reading of the protests is that the protesters demand justice, protesters demand accountability, and protesters demand a radically different society than what we had in the past 35 years. And I'm afraid I need to say also that the crisis of our society began in probably 1989, but the peak of that crisis has been reached with the contemporary government.
Let me
And I would say,
let me ask you this, Philip. It's interesting to me that many of the people who sent us in questions from Serbia in preparation for this program were reluctant to use their full names. They didn't want their identity to be disclosed. Are students and others taking part in these demonstrations taking a risk? And what kind of risk are they taking?
absolutely. When you see the numbers of young people, including high school pupils, being arrested, also students being arrested and beaten up on the streets of Belgrade and other smaller cities throughout Serbia, absolutely, they're taking a huge risk. University professors are as well taking a risk of losing their job and also being exposed as traitors.
Let's hear from Danica Ilic. Danica, you're close to the ground on this. Do you think the student protests reflect the general mood of the country?
I do believe that it reflects general mood. Since I'm a journalist, I do reporting on the ground. I spoke to the people who support the students-led movement. I also spoke to the people who idealize and support the President Vučić. Both of them are very honest. But I can say that the general feeling is that we are coming back to the universal values such as justice and democracy. And for me personally, what is really important is that I've seen that these students, the Serbian youth, fight for the institutions and for the rule of law because they do still believe that democratic principles in this country, that we can get back to them.
But it's interesting though, because he just 2 years ago he won an election with a massive vote. 60% of the people voted for him.
Yes, but the elections were not fair and democratic, and it's very easy to win the elections if you fight the game that is not fair and that you have some sort of kind of advantage over the opposition or other players.
Okay, let's hear from the minister now, because the allegations are now piling up, aren't they? Marko Đurić,
They are indeed.
Stolen elections, police brutality, professors risking losing their jobs. Is President Vučić listening to these concerns, do you think?
Serbia is a world away from some of the descriptions provided by esteemed colleagues. I mean, when I listen to this, I would get an impression that we are living in Milošević Serbia. And in fact, 25 years ago, I was myself a student on the streets of Belgrade protesting the Milošević regime. And I can tell you that we are a world away from where Serbia was 25 years ago. And it's extremely easy to discount elections as undemocratic without backing this with any substantive evidence. But the truth is that if you look at the opinion polls, and I'm not speaking about our local opinion polls, I'm speaking about major European and global polling companies, you will see that the main ruling party in Serbia is polling at slightly below 50% of the votes after 6 or 7 months of protests. And with all due respect, Mr. Stefanovic's party is polling below census. And there's a reason for this. The reason lies in the fact that you cannot have any credibility to actually claim to be fighting for a different kind of Serbia, to be fighting against corruption, to be fighting for stronger institutions, with having such a poor track record while you were in government yourselves. That's one of the reasons. The other part of the reasons, which is probably even more significant, is the fact that in the past 10 years, which coincides with the time in which President Vučić was the main political actor in the government, Serbia has managed to more than double the size of its GDP, meaning that the level of living standards has increased. Are there issues, are there serious issues in many of the areas that were mentioned by, for example, Mr. Balunović? No doubt about it. But can a society really resolve all of the issues that have been piling up for decades in 1 or 2 terms?
Let's go back to the questioner and find out what he makes of those answers.
Yes, thank you for your thoughts. I think the key points were touched upon properly. And what I think was not emphasized enough is that the Serbian public is seized by the massive propaganda for years. And this myth about Kosovo is holding us back because we never faced the war crimes from the 90s committed by Milosevic power forces. And it is the same political body that is now in power in Serbia. It is the same people, including President Vucic. But what is the most important thing for me is that 1 million people have left Serbia in the last 20 years, 1 million out of 7. And more than 90% of them went to Western democracies. This shows what we really wish for, and that's a well-ordered society like Western democracies, and nobody here wants to live in a country like Russia.
Okay, I want to move on to a question from Anna. Anna, what's your question?
Hello to everybody. And my question is, when will the judicial system in Serbia start to act lawfully? Since many judges are corrupt and act against people by making nonsense decisions or act too slowly, even in urgent cases.
Anna, I believe you have direct experience of this. Can you tell me what happened?
I fought for custody over my children, and that case lasted really too long since it was about minors, and this period was really awful. The system didn't respond to the advice of the social service to prolong protection of me. They just ignored it. And unfortunately, there are a lot of femicides in Serbia, and we are all aware of it.
Thank you. Let's get our panel on this. The NGO Freedom House say the judiciary is compromised by political influences over judicial appointments, and many judges complain about being subject to external pressure as well. Filip Balunovic, do you think the judiciary is independent?
No, just like we don't have any independent spheres of society. It's I would just like to reflect on a couple of things that Mr. Đurić said, if I may. He said that contemporary Serbia is miles away from Milosevic Serbia. But President Vucic, his political legacy precisely comes from the 1990s. And he was a right-wing partner to Milosevic, especially in the late 1990s.
Filip, I want to bring you back to this question of the judiciary. And Anna's question was about the slowness of the judiciary and the independence of the judiciary. Do you believe that the judiciary is independent?
No, I answered the question. Judiciary is not independent, just like anything else that should be public is independent. And of course, Mr. Đurić mentioned the late socialist era, and the traces, and this is really fun, I must admit, that the traces of corruption in contemporary Serbia date back to the late socialist era. The problem of contemporary Serbia, among others, is that contemporary Serbia gave up on the most progressive parts of the socialist heritage. It dates actually in the years where when Mr. Vucic in the 1990s was a part of the criminal organization called Serbian Radical Party.
Borko Stefanovic, if corruption dates back to the 1990s, it was rife when you were in power. What steps do you think need to be taken?
Well, I think it's pretty obvious. I will try to tackle, if you allow me, just for a few seconds, what Minister said, because it's not amusing at all. I think it's quite disturbing, because they live in their parallel world of privileges and corruption and violence. We don't have a free media, we don't have free elections, and we have overall violence. Tell me any country in Europe in which police officers in plain clothes, sometimes without badges, come to arrest students with allegation that they are terrorists. Tell me any country in Europe in which you have police brutality and police cordons with full equipment in front of the voting booths. It's fair to say, and I'm coming back to your question, that our judiciary is absolutely in the pocket of the ruling party and Mr. Vucic himself. They are trying to particize it like they did to every other sphere, because people in Serbia have come together for the first time in many, many years, and we are not willing to give up on mafia and organized crime to keep on running our country.
Minister, quite the accusations. How do you respond?
Indeed, I listened very patiently to these baseless and at times rude accusations. But before I answer, I would like to just briefly comment on what Mrs. Anna said. I believe that every Serbian and former Yugoslav family has a story of injustice related to inefficient judiciary. And this problem indeed goes back decades. To the credit of our government, we've adopted a law specifically targeting violence in families. And this law has already prevented thousands of cases of violence, femicides, and other criminal offenses related to family violence. Now, speaking about pressure against judiciary, I see for the past 8 months continuous pressure against judiciary by the supporters of the opposition, who very often gather in front of courts, in front of the prosecution offices, and demand that judges and prosecutors act in line with their political or ideological views, which quite often do not coincide with the facts of certain cases.
Anna, how do you respond to that?
Well, there is a law that protects family against family violence, but that law should develop much more, since everybody is telling you you are safe, don't worry, you are protected, you're not alone. But indeed, you are alone in this fight, and nobody is behind you. Not judicial system, not police. Before you get the paper, let's say the decision from the court, nobody is behind you.
Anna, thank you for your question and for sharing your experience with us. Now to our next question, which comes from Jovan, who is a law student. Jovan, what is your question?
Hello, everyone. My question today is why is Serbia still trying to join the European Union despite the hostile attitude coming from the Western countries?
Okay, why is Serbia still trying to join the European Union despite the hostile attitude from Western countries towards Serbia? Serbia applied to join the EU in 2009 and was given candidate status in 2012. Most political parties want to join, but Serbia is still a long way from qualifying. One of the stumbling blocks is that the EU would require Serbia to normalize relations with Kosovo, which most of the EU countries recognize as an independent state, but which Belgrade still considers to be part of Serbia. Danica Ilic, where is public opinion on this, and what does Kosovo represent to the Serbian imagination?
Well, today, less than half of Serbian citizens would vote in a referendum to join the EU. That means that 15 years ago, as many as 70% of Serbs would be in favor of joining the EU, which is not the case today. So that question, why the sentiment has changed, is actually for the governing party and here present Minister Đurić. Also, when it comes for Kosovo, my family comes from Kosovo, and that is a beautiful place which I visit every year. For many of the Serbs who would say that Kosovo is an integral part of Serbia.
Thank you. Let's get Filip Balunović back. Filip, are Serbs more likely to identify as European and want to join the EU if they're younger?
Not really, and I often get this question, especially if we compare student protests in Serbia and, for instance, protests in Georgia or similar countries where people wave with European Union flags, etc. I mean, if successful, this movement in Serbia would be one of the rare movements which goes directly against the narrative of the president that would be actually run by its own people.
Can I just remind you, Filip, of the question? Why is Serbia still trying to join the European Union despite the hostile attitude from the West towards Serbia?
I wouldn't say there is a hostile attitude. Mr. Vučić is very good friends with all major European representatives. And here I'm not talking about European Parliament or European Commission or European Council. I'm talking about the people who actually make decisions in Europe and European Union. And this is, I mean, in a strange way, Mr. Vučić succeeded in being very close friends with Russia and China, United States, Germany, and all these countries have their own interests in doing business with Mr. Vučić.
Borko Stefanovic, there's a long list of conditions that Serbia will have to meet before it will be granted membership, one of which we just talked about, the independence of the judiciary, the question of Kosovo, normalizing relationships. How far from membership is Serbia?
Well, I think it's really crucial to say that our current government and President Vučić have absolutely no intention to bring Serbia closer or to Serbia to join European Union. Why? One would ask, because that would mean that this regime would have to be fully accountable for the corruption, for the destruction of the rule of law, for the brutality against peaceful demonstrators. So this regime, despite the lip service, in the same time, in our public, they are saying that students and oppositions are agents of the West. So what they are doing, they're trying to get away, with the thievery, with the corruption, with the violence. And it will not go away. So basically, Serbs and Serbia should join European Union as soon as possible. This is the best place for us. We are a member of Europe. We are in Europe, and we will be in Europe. But this regime has zero interest to bringing us closer. They did nothing in technical, in advancement concerning our accession process, in the process of normalization with Pristina. So there will be no progress, there will be no EU integrations as long as we have this regime in power in Serbia. And this is our job, our homework, and we will do it in a peaceful, democratic way.
Marko Đurić, you've no intention of making progress towards the European Union membership. Is that true?
The flag you can see behind me, right beside the Serbian flag, is the flag of the European Union. And in fact, under the government of President Vučić, Serbia has opened the biggest number of chapters and clusters for EU membership.
Which exactly?
In the past 12 years, Serbia has made serious advance towards the EU membership. Unfortunately, this does not depend entirely on us. Our economy is in a far better state than even in some of the recent EU member states in terms of macroeconomic stability. But I want to also speak a bit about some principles that have been mentioned here. It's interesting to hear people ostensibly advocating rule of law and respect of laws, while at the same time they're violating laws every day on the streets of Belgrade, on the streets of Serbian cities. Can you imagine what would happen in the UK if someone would attempt to block the M6 highway or try to block Heathrow, and to do all of this without registering their gatherings with the police?
Sorry for the interruption, but I want to bring you back to the question. Will Serbia ever recognize the independence of Kosovo?
Well, for Serbs and for Serbia, I would say Kosovo and Metohija, as we say, is not just about 13% of the territory. It answers one of the most fundamental questions for every community, and that is who we are. The seat of the Serbian Orthodox Church is in Peć, a UNESCO World Heritage Monastery, one of the 4 World Heritage Monasteries of the Serbian Church in Kosovo. And 10 out of 38 municipalities in Kosovo are Serb-majority municipalities. So obviously we need to work towards a compromise. We've had 2 political agreements so far, and we need to work on economy, on building bridges in the economic sphere, so to ensure that there is some kind of a perspective for young people. Because one of the concerns that we share with some of the interlocutors here is we want to keep the youth in our region. We want to keep the youth in Serbia.
Okay, thank you very much, Minister. Let's go back to our questioner, to Jovan. Jovan, what do you make of those answers? And just explain why you say the West is hostile to Serbia.
First of all, thank you all for your answers. Second of all, I think that Western countries are hostile to Serbia because of their stance on Kosovo. They fully back Kosovo in their independence. And second of all, they are a bit hypocritical to Serbian society because they profess their dedication to democracy, yet they do nothing about the decreasing state of democracy in Serbia.
That's it for World Question Serbia. A big thank you to our panel and all the questioners that contributed to this fascinating debate. And thank you for watching wherever you are in the world. I'm Alan Little. Goodbye.